So I've got an awesome bunch of panelists up here. We're going to introduce them first. We're going to talk a little bit about Claude Shannon specifically, a little bit about his effect with society at large. And so I definitely want to get into those introductions. Right here on my left, we've got Mark Levinson. He's the director and producer of the award-winning documentary feature. Yep, absolutely, yeah. So he was the director and producer of the Particle Fever, about the discovery of the Higgs boson at the Large Hadron Collider experiment outside Geneva. Before embarking on a film career, Levinson earned a PhD in particle physics from the University of California at Berkeley. In the film world, he became a specialist in the post-production writing and recording of dialogue known as ADR, working on such films as The English Patient, The Talented Mr. Ripley, Cold Mountain, Seven, The Rainmaker, and The Social Network. And of course, he's the reason that we're all here gathered today, because he's the writer, director, and producer of The Bit Player. So one more time for Mark Levinson. Fantastic. And then we've got Nick Teague to his left. Nick Teague is the founder of Automunge, a Florida startup offering a platform to prepare data for machine learning. He is also the author of From the Diaries of John Henry, an essay collection on a range of subjects like machine learning, quantum computing, and entrepreneurship. Teague is a licensed professional engineer and graduate of the University of Florida. So please, everyone, give it up for Nick Teague. All right. And then over there, we have Azadeh Vosoughi, who received a BS, or a Bachelor of Science degree from Sharif University of Technology in Tehran, Iran, and then a master's degree from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts, and a PhD from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, all in electrical engineering. She's an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Central Florida, and her research interests lie in the area of wireless communication, statistical signal processing, detection and estimation theory, and brain signal processing. She received the prestigious National Science Foundation Career Award in 2011. So definitely give it up for Azadeh. And then at the end over there, we have Elaine Raybourn. She is a principal member of the technical staff in applied cognitive science at Sandia National Laboratories, where she is the laboratory's instructional PI for interoperable design for extreme scale application software, which is definitely a mouthful. Her research focuses on virtual teams, immersive technology, and transmedia learning. Her work has been featured at SXSW-EDU, TED Cross ABQ, and the Game Developers Conference, and the International Conference for High Performance Computing, Networking, Storage, and Analysis, which is another mouthful. An artist trained in Florence, Italy, she holds a PhD in intercultural communication with an emphasis in human-computer interaction from the University of New Mexico, and a graduate certificate in modeling and simulation behavioral cybersecurity from the University of Central Florida. Elaine's greatest passion is to create immersive story environments that question our assumptions and allow us to learn more deeply about ourselves and others. So one more time for all of our panelists, for Elaine there at the end. We're super excited to have them here at the Enzian Theater. We're really excited to be here as well. We've got a lot of really awesome questions planned for all of us, a really good discussion. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about Claude Shannon in a minute, but I do want to get to know our panelists a little bit in a little bit more detail. So my first question for everyone is a pretty simple one. Claude Shannon is the father of the information age, and we can attribute pretty much every piece of modern technology in some way to this single person. And so I'd like to warm up by asking everyone, we'll just go down the line, what specific modern technology are you most surprised by? What would you be amazed to find out that we've accomplished as a kid? What do you think Claude Shannon would even be amazed that we've accomplished in the last 50 years since he had his major work done? So I'll start with Mark here on my left.
I mean, it's interesting because, I sort of grew up with most of this, and when I think lately, what's actually amazed me most of all is that we can actually do any of this. In a certain sense, the fact that we actually can move electrons around, that we can actually get them to switch, that we can actually operate things that we actually can't ever see, I think is the most amazing thing of all. And in some sense, I'm sort of reverting back to even before Shannon, but right. That's what's really pretty astonishing to me. And there's the manifest things that we all take for granted, but I think people don't appreciate the fact that we're sort of jaded about technology, and it's really sort of amazing testament that we can actually operate at this level that is actually beyond our sight.
Absolutely, and with your work on the particle fever about the Higgs boson and everything, that's especially prominent coming from you for sure. Absolutely. All right, fantastic. Can we move down the line then? Same question for you, Nick.
Okay, so I understand the question is, what would Claude Shannon be surprised by?
Yeah, you surprised by, or what would you think Claude Shannon would be surprised by? Either one.
One thing we learned from the movie was that Claude Shannon spent a lot of time, especially later in his career, thinking about artificial intelligence. And there's obviously been some rapid progress in recent years with respect to machine learning and artificial intelligence. And one aspect that I think I'm continuously surprised by is the generative capacities of machine learning to create completely artificial, but completely very realistic images and text of various domains that to the untrained eye could be perceived as the product of either the real world or human imagination. And Claude Shannon actually foresaw this, and he wrote about in his paper, A Mathematical Theory of Communication, demonstrating some probabilistic means to create artificial text that could potentially pass for loosely real text. And in modern practice, we've definitely extended the capabilities of creating artificial text, which I think Claude Shannon would be pleased to see.
Yeah, at the end of the film there, he was definitely thinking about that. He was contemplating, how far machines would come and really hoping that he'd be able to see that, so absolutely. All right, moving on down the line, I got the same question for you, Azadeh, down there. What are you most surprised by? What do you think Claude would be?
What I find, I was thinking about this question last night, I was like, to me, it's smartphone in the sense that the way that it has impacted my life and so many other people's life. So I see it as the way that we humans, no matter where we are in this world, I feel connected. Especially, I guess I'm touched by the events that is happening around the world, good and bad news, and the fact that, for instance, me, myself, as a person who have migrated to United States and live away from, my country, so the part that I've been most, touched by is the fact that although people live in different regions of the world, still, thanks to this technology, we can be connected and be aware of each other and hopefully help each other. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like Mark was saying, I think people have just become jaded a little bit about cell phone technology and how amazing that is. And when it stops working for even 5 minutes, I myself get frustrated. Like, why is Verizon not working? But I mean, it's an incredible thing, and we definitely owe it to Claude Shannon as well. All right, one more time down there, Elaine.
Yeah, so I think that one thing that's really striking to me is that Shannon was able to really create a model for us to understand communication. But he almost didn't realize the impact that it would have on society. And so I think that he would be very surprised to find out today how our use of information technology and technology in general has really impacted the way that we behave, our behaviors. It's changed us in many ways that I don't think he would have predicted. I think that would have surprised him.
Absolutely.
Actually, just to add, I want to just add, hearing everybody else's, and very specifically with Shannon, I think the internet. You have to realize he had, I think, in terms of, we know he already anticipated, machine being able to be better than a human with chess. He actually overestimated by 5 years. He imagined a time when we would be able to simulate the human brain. But I think what he had no idea about, and he didn't know about, was the internet.
Yeah.
That
Absolutely.
was something that was beyond his time.
I mean, it probably is the second largest shift, maybe after the information age. All right. Next question is that Claude Shannon maintained a childlike wonder throughout his life, and even after his most influential accomplishments, he went on to invent several machines in his later life that he described as useless himself, including things like the flaming trumpet, it was his family, the flaming trumpet and rocket frisbee, but also things like juggling robots and the chess machine. And so I'd like to ask everyone really quick, before we talk about Claude Shannon a little bit more specifically, what is your juggling robot? Like, if you weren't busy changing the world like all of you are doing right now through film or research or AI, what would you want to spend your time on? And what do you think your later in life inventions would be? So let's go. We can move back way down the line. So we'll start with Elaine if we can on that side.
All right. Let's see. So my background is in communication, and what's really interesting is I've always had a fascination with the message. I think that's why you go into human communication as opposed to another field. It's because you're fascinated with the message, the channel, the everything about it, the ambiguity, the entropy. And so I think I would still be doing sound. I'm very, very curious about that. I was always curious about cryptography as well, which is why I went into cybersecurity a bit. And I had a unicycle when I was 12 years old, so I'd be riding a unicycle.
Are you sure you're not a descendant of Claude Shannon? Because it sounds like
I
you
don't
might be
know.
a family member. That's
It was
fantastic.
weird, trust me.
Absolutely. All right, Azadeh, do you have any?
I don't have a good answer to this question in the
That's-
sense that what if I don't do my job, what I would do is I'd rather sit and study history of
Yeah.
human beings. Has nothing to do with Shannon, but that would be my fascination to learn about the mistakes that human being has made over centuries,
Which I'm sure is plenty. Yeah. Fantastic.
but has nothing to do with Shannon. So
Absolutely. Go for it.
So I understand the question is, what would be my personal juggling robot?
Yeah, assuming you couldn't build. I mean, he's already done the juggling robot, so you can't do that again. Something else.
So I am a writer. I've published a collection of essays, which are available online. And I've spent most of the recent years documenting the development of my company. But I guess if I ever get the chance, I'd like to get back to some more creative writing as well.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, you're kind of doing yours, right?
I'm kind of doing mine, which is a fortunate thing to say. And I'd say the underlying theme, though, which I hope I can continue to do, is really sort of breaking down what I think is a pretty artificial division between art and science. And maybe maybe self-justification because I went from physics into film,
Right.
but I don't see that as such a huge division. And in both Particle Fever and in this film, I mean, important ideas for me were as much how things are done and the fact that frontier-level scientific research is like art. And so I'm hoping to be able to continue that and with my future projects.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that for sure. But I do want to talk a bit about Shannon specifically because obviously he's a large part of the reason we're gathered here today. And so, Mark, I'm going to ask you, what do you think shaped Shannon to be the genius inventor that he became? Was there anything different about his upbringing or childhood that made him who he was, or was he just born remarkable, do you think, after your research?
Well, I think he was born remarkable, but I mean, and it's something that I sort of discovered and tried to use in the film is that I think that there were antecedents to everything he did. So we know that he was interested in Edgar Allan Poe. You can see the origins of his interest in cryptography already back there and in Boolean algebra. And, the telegraph, he was interested in Lewis Carroll. And so I think that these things that at the time, were not completely out of the ordinary for somebody to be interested in, they actually did have a sort of progression in his development, which came together in his later years. And so I don't think he necessarily was thinking he was going to go in that direction. In fact, he has said that he's not even sure why he studied math. His older sister was a mathematician, and I think he felt competition. But he just followed his curiosity. And it turns out, though, that there was some direction to that, between these things that were his interests. This is what ended up, who knows? Why did he think? He said, too, it was very unusual for somebody to take a Boolean algebra class when he was an engineering major at Michigan. And that led him to put this connection that nobody had thought of before. Similarly with Lewis Carroll and the puzzles and things like that. So I do think the things that he did, for whatever reason, led to what he ended up doing.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to put everyone on the spot and ask when you first learned about Claude Shannon, because personally, I had heard the name before, but I really didn't know anything about him until doing a little bit of research for this panel right here. So did you know Claude Shannon beforehand, all of you? So why do you think it is, then I'll just ask you again real quick, Mark, why do you think it is that people don't know him specifically? You talked about a little bit about it in the film, but maybe you could elaborate a bit more?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one is that he wasn't interested in fame or money. He didn't like to write. I mean, I've often thought, why is somebody, for instance, Richard Feynman is so well known. I doubt that anybody, who's not a physicist has any idea what Feynman really did. Why do they know it? Well, because he wrote books, and then he was on the Challenger panel, and so people know him Shannon barely wanted to write his own papers, and he was shy, and so I think that's one of the reasons. I think he was way ahead of his time. Is the other reason. He was sort of forgotten. It took a long time to catch up, and so I think it was really a combination of those aspects.
Well, it'll be everyone's job here to go out and spread the word because,
Yes.
like I said, I did not know who Claude Shannon was, and that really is just an inexcusable offense for someone that works at the Orlando Science Center. So I'm going to come to Elaine now, and one topic that's always fascinated me is the question of how scientific breakthroughs happen and if they would happen independent of specific scientists. So, for example, Copernicus, he realized that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but we would have eventually realized that without Copernicus specifically. And I think the same question could be asked of Claude Shannon. There's obviously no way to know for sure, but in your opinion, had this revolutionary thinker not existed when he did, how long do you think it would be before the information age started to come about? I mean, it didn't really happen for a couple of decades, even after his big work. Do you think we'd still be using analog phone lines and things like that?
Well, so I think Shannon might appreciate my answer. I'm going to answer that there were a lot of things happening at the same time. It was very complex. There were a number of elements inside and outside of the system that were forcing things to come to fruition. And so I think that certainly, Shannon, being able to take a problem and to find its most elegant and simplest elements and express it that way certainly catapulted and moved things in a direction that we've been able to see the benefit from. But remember, this was a time when there were a lot of great minds that were working together. The fact that they were all together, creating an invisible college, they were collaborating. I think it was going to happen. And not mentioned in the film, but there was another scientist, Norbert Wiener, who had also come up with cybernetics at the time. And so there was some discussion about actually who was the father of the information age.
Right.
Personally, I think it was Claude Shannon. But so there was just so much happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I think it's really important to look at where we are today, look at the future, when it's exciting, when there are things where you can look at a time and say, my gosh, this is a great time to be alive.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think that was that time then, and it's this time now.
For sure, that's super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
On an entirely unrelated topic, Nick, when Shannon is brought up, his employer, Bell Labs, is often mentioned in the same breath. I mean, it was a big part of who he was, and Bell Labs is a giant conglomerate corporation, employed hundreds of scientists, and attributed to huge advancements with analog systems and the invention of the transistor and all this. Some even say that Shannon wouldn't have accomplished as much as he did without Bell Labs. And so my question is, do you think there are any companies today that rival Bell Labs in the 20th century or nowadays in the 21st century? If not, why do you think that might be?
I mean, I'm sure we could all name a few, Fortune 100 tech companies
Right.
that have some pretty significant research arms. I'd be hard-pressed to compare them directly to Bell Labs. One interesting thing I did learn about Bell Labs when I was reading the biography of Claude Shannon, A Mind at Play, which actually the authors of that book were interviewed in this movie.
Right.
I recommend it. It's a very good book if you'd like to learn more, A Mind at Play. But the Bell Labs was unique in that they actually published their own academic journal, which is like pretty unheralded for corporate research. And they, for several decades, even after the time of Shannon, would just publish research. And that's one thing that kind of drew me to the machine learning industry, actually, is that there's kind of an openness of research that's kind of unique to machine learning that is more corporations are willing to publicly publish research and blogs and papers. And so I think that's one thing that was really cool about Bell Labs is that they were so open about their research.
That's really cool, yeah.
I would actually just say that personally, I know of efforts both at the current Bell Labs and at IBM to try to facilitate more of this openness again. So it's sort of interesting because both have heads of research that are younger and have talked to me about trying to recapture that. And very explicitly at Bell Labs, when Shannon was there, they had this program EAT, which was Experiments in Art and Technology, where they actually were encouraging their scientists to work with artists. And they are trying to resuscitate that at Bell Labs. And IBM is also trying to sort of develop a sort of arts program. So maybe, maybe we're going to be able to recapture that.
I hope so. I mean, that would be amazing. Even just to have the idea of being able to work there someday is a goal, or just what that could certainly come out of that. So we've talked a little bit about Shannon, but I'd like to talk, of course, about some of the larger questions before giving the audience their own chance to ask some of their own questions. And so my next one is for Azadeh. In the 20th century, Bell Labs created the largest communication systems the world had ever seen. It was obviously an amazing accomplishment. It led to an explosion of innovation and culture. But if you fast forward a few decades, pretty much the entire system of switchboards and everything that we used to use is no longer useful, right? And so that's really because of the advent of wireless communication. We don't really need a lot of that technology anymore. And because you're, kind of a specialist in wireless communication, I'd ask, what do you think the next breakthrough in communication is going to be? And do you think it's going to leave our current system as useless as, switchboards are back in the day?
Wow.
Big
That's
questions.
a loaded question. What comes to my mind, which luckily is aligned with part of the movie we saw on the interaction between human and brain. So over years, I've learned a little bit because of the research I'm doing on brain signal processing on brain-computer interface systems, which for the general audience, it's a computer-based system that supposed to read the electrical brain signals, amplifies it, digitize it, and then extract the features from the signals, and then translate those features to an output that it's going to be applied to devices that would take action. For instance, a wheelchair or a prosthetic arm or robotic arm. It sounds science fiction, but over the past couple of years, I've learned about this magnificent research that it's being done in some research labs around the world, that they are trying to push the frontiers of technology. And hopefully, I guess the vision is that things that it's going on in some of the research lab would be brought to the, public,
right.
And would one day would be able to help all people who are suffered from disabilities, from neurological disease, or people who get disability after head trauma or stroke. They can gain their functionality that they have lost. So that's one thing that I'm hoping that would revolutionize, human society, the same way that nobody would have thought one day that wireless technology would do. If I may add, because I'm teaching a course this semester at UCF, and last Thursday I was quoting this sentence from Hertz, who have, and Michael Faraday, who are doing the electromagnetic equation. So Hertz, there's this lovely quote from Hertz back in 1800 that he said, oh, I see no practicality in the wireless, waves that I can predict from my equation. So, I'm just hoping that the same thing would happen about brain-computer systems, and in 20 years or so, these systems would change probably the face of the
amazing.
life that we are living today. The other things that I've heard people in the research community are talking about nowadays is smart cities or smart communities. So basically, the idea is that integrating information and technology with Internet of Things sensors that are around and they are collecting this data, how we can integrate this so we can make our cities to run more efficiently. So that includes collecting information about not only civilians, citizens of the city, but let's say the waste management, water supply, electricity, utility, hospital, libraries, schools. If this information all can be integrated and help to reduce the cost of running a city and use the resources more efficiently and make a direct communication between the officials of the city versus the citizens. So that's another vision that I hear, and if it happens, I guess the life would look different from
Absolutely, yeah, that would be incredibly
what
different.
we live now.
Maybe as big of a change as the internet in general, or the birth of the information age. Elaine, I'm going to come to you next. In the film, Shannon is compared to Newton and Einstein as a person who not only progressed a field of research, but kind of created an entirely new branch of science and mathematics. And there's obviously thousands of brilliant scientists and mathematicians over the last few hundred years, but I think the thing that puts Shannon, Newton, and Einstein in a different tier is their ability to really think creatively. And this is actually a pretty big push in the scientific community of late. In fact, many scientific educational institutions like the Orlando Science Center are starting to add an A to the traditional STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. We're starting to call it STEAM, science, technology, art, engineering, and math. Engineering, art, and math. And so my question for you then would be, how do you think this emphasis on art and creativity is going to shape our field, our society, in a general sense?
So I think that actually if we looked at some of the really influential minds, we might find that, like Shannon, they did combine art and science, or for them there wasn't a distinction. They were just creating. They were inventing. They were solving problems. And I had this discussion with Mark outside. We were talking about that art and science, the actual process of doing each is so similar. It actually, since I have a background in studio art, I have always thought, when in working with my colleagues, that it would be so helpful if my scientist friends had taken a course in studio art. Mm-hmm. If they had learned what it's like, the way an artist is able to sustain creativity through very dry moments where there's no creativity. All of the tricks and tips that we learn to just keep that creativity going. And I think they would be so valuable, right? I mean, we actually do the same things. We don't exactly speak the same language. And so I think that would be something that would really help us moving forward. And I'm very encouraged that we are now talking about STEAM. Yeah. It's really important, especially with our new technologies that incorporate so much of science and art coming together. Right. And the problems today are so multidisciplinary that no single one discipline can solve everything. We need to work together and collaborate.
Absolutely. All right, I've got one more question up here, and then I'm going to give it off to the audience out there. So if you have any questions, cue them up in your brain, and we've got some people walking around with some microphones that'll help relay that question. But for Nick here, there's obviously a lot of focus on Shannon being the father of the information age, but obviously, as it was portrayed in the film, he did a lot of work with machine learning as well, at least early forms of it. But AI largely remained a research project for the following decades and only recently became something that the general person interacts with on a daily basis. So the question then is, what has allowed for that major growth spurt recently, and what's going to allow for that next step in AI and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so the history of artificial intelligence, it's for several decades now there's been active research, and one characteristic that's repeatedly come up is what's known as an AI winter, where basically the broad consensus directions of research hit some roadblock, and all of the funding dries up, and all of the research dries up, and it often takes years to overcome that hurdle. And it's actually just as recently as maybe the early 2000s, artificial intelligence was not really somewhat credible line of professional inquiry, where people would hesitate to put artificial intelligence on their resume. I mean,
Right.
to give you an idea, and there's really kind of a phase change I would characterize that took place. If I had to pinpoint a time, probably around the period of 2012 or so. So only very, very recently, where there was the development of modern paradigms of machine learning called what's known as deep learning. And there's not really a full consensus on what deep learning is, but one way to characterize it is that it's the application of neural networks that have expanded depth of layers of neurons, such that they have increased capacity for learning generalized from complexity. And if I had to characterize the type of things that brought about this phase change in the last 10 years, it's kind of a convergence of factors that contribute to that. One, I would say, would be the internet economy that brought big data scale data sets available for researchers to train machine learning models. So we have much more data to work with, and so we can actually train these deep models now. Another thing that contributed is the progression of Moore's law, which is the density of transistors available on computer chips. And so we now have much more compute power to apply to training neural networks. And more specifically, a real big contributor to the modern renaissance has been the training of neural networks with graphic processing units, or GPUs. And that's actually turned out to have, that special type of architecture has significant advantages for the type of parallelized operations necessary to train a neural network. And then there's also been some algorithmic developments in what are called activation functions, which are kind of an esoteric term, but for the application of neural networks that have allowed for deeper models. And so through the convergence of all these factors, there's been a kind of a revolution that has really brought broad-scale adoption to industry of deep learning networks. And the thing about machine learning that's really cool is that when we talk about progress in machine learning, it's not an abstract term. We have very concrete metrics that can demonstrate how far we've come in just these few recent years. One way to do that is with competitions. And so researchers, when they're applying these algorithms, will compete to see who can have the most accuracy in generating predictions. One competition that comes to mind is the ImageNet competition, where researchers will compete to who can apply an algorithm to generate labels for images. And that's kind of was one of the big demonstrators of the efficiency of deep learning to, and there's actually many domains where for narrow domains and narrow tasks that machine learning has approached, or in some cases even exceeded, humans' ability to perform those narrow tasks. Right. And so there's been a tremendous amount of rapid progress in the last few years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I could keep asking questions for the next 3 hours up here, but I do want to give the audience any chance they can to ask some questions. So just raise your hand up. We've got 2 people walking around with microphones. They can help you ask those questions. So, yeah, right there in the middle.
Yes. Let me start with a segue. When Tesla passed away, the government apparently confiscated boxes and boxes of his papers. Mark, in your movie, there's mention that he had boxes and boxes of papers he wrote. Does anybody know what happened to those?
Yeah, most of them Andrew has. There has been certain things have been donated to MIT, to the MIT History Museum. So I think most of them are around, and it's interesting. I never expected this would be a very prominent question after every screening. People really do seem to focus on that, and it was true. I mean, when we were filming there, it was amazing. That house is amazing, and we wandered up one day to these rooms, and there was just these boxes of papers and things like that. I mean, I think that they don't expect there's anything truly revolutionary, but you don't know. And Andrew has them, and I think he's a little overwhelmed at this point, but they are talking about donating them to other people. And there is, I don't know if people know who the Indian mathematician Ramanujan was, but this was a mathematician who sort of came out of the blue and had very revolutionary ideas, and he died early. And they actually did discover some old papers of his, and only about 10 years ago, they rediscovered them and realized that they were incredibly important for some modern ideas in physics. So yes, there is a possibility, there is a precedent for that. But I don't know if you want to be punished and have to go through that. But
You might have to make a sequel at some point.
yeah.
I wouldn't mind being punished with that.
Yeah, I'd volunteer. All right, we got one over here? Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the Enzian for providing an excellent educational activity.
Definitely. Let's give it up for that.
That's one of the big reasons we come here. And number two, I liked the genetic code stuff. I thought that was very interesting and maybe even somewhat scary.
Yeah, it's what's interesting actually is that Shannon's idea, what Shannon did back then, is not something that is probably used now. It was really sort of ahead of its time, and now it's used differently. But ironically, he's having an impact in genetics in a different way, which is that in sequencing. So in gene sequencing, you can't actually sequence an entire strand of DNA. You have to break it up into segments, and the way that they found is one of the best ways to actually figure out how they go back together again is using information theory. So Shannon's ideas, David Shea, who's in the film, is one of the people who's doing that, but there's a lot of people who are information theorists now who are having a lot of impact on gene sequencing. And then, of course, is the whole idea of storage. And people are starting to figure out how to store information in DNA. And there was a couple of researchers at Columbia who I think were one of the first, if not the first, to store some data and retrieve it. And the first thing they stored was Shannon's 1948 paper.
That's right.
It's very cool.
And actually, an important figure in Shannon's life was Vannevar Bush. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Who was kind of served as a mentor and kind of helped him early in his academic career, such that I think it was after he published his master's thesis that the two became acquainted. And it was Bush that actually directed him, you should take on genetics, and because he wanted him to explore other areas. And I think that kind of may have encouraged him in later in life, possibly, I speculate, to be willing to take on novel terrain and things like that. But
Yeah. Awesome. All right, so we got right over here. Absolutely.
I just have a couple anecdotes. I grew up in Winchester, Massachusetts, and was very good friends with Andrew.
Oh.
And the flaming trumpet was not a useless invention. Andrew won the New York Invitational unicycling tournament and was declared champion of the world when he was 17. And he was, like his father, pretty shy and modest at the time. And I read about it in the local newspaper, and I said, well, Andrew, what did you do? I didn't know about this. And he said, well, I played a flaming trumpet and rode around on a unicycle on a 360-degree track, and centrifugal force held me in. And I said, where did you get the track? And he said, oh, my father made it. Yeah. And I used to hang out at their house when I was in high school, after school, and that room that they showed his inventions in and stuff, I saw one day, for the first time. We were usually in the basement where all the musical instruments were and stuff. Andrew was quite a musician and artist, and his brother as well. And this room usually had the door shut, and I remember the door was open that day, and I just saw all this garbage all over the floor, transistors and wires, and there was a lot of entropy in the house to start with, but this really topped it all. It was like the biggest mess of a room I've ever seen. And I thought, well, Bob, who was inventing, his brother who was inventing new sounds, was electronic sounds, was making a big mess in there. And I said, Andrew, who's doing what in this room? And I said, is Bob really making that much of a mess all the time? And he said, oh no, it's my father's room. And then finally, I thought, a couple more things. Claude built unicycles for all the kids that were of a height that they could play basketball on. So in the driveway of that house that they showed, they had a basketball net, and they Claude would go out there and play basketball with the 3 kids on unicycles. And one time I had the opportunity, I remember, to play Frisbee with him, with Claude. We all went out in the yard, and he said, well, let's, Andrew said, Dad, you want to come out and throw the Frisbee around? He said, sure. So we went out chucking the Frisbee around, and I never saw anybody who could control a Frisbee as well as Claude Shannon. I mean, he could do things that nobody on any Frisbee team I've ever seen could do. He could make it come back to him at any angle and all kinds of weird shots. They're incredibly super coordinated people. Let's see, of the other toys,
Did you ride the
chairlift? I didn't, but I saw it. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, I never knew about the rocketed Frisbee. That's pretty cool. Yeah. But I remember Claude. Andrew and I made a short movie for English class with another friend, Doug Fritsch, when we were in 10th grade. And right around that time, Andrew brought this little white box to school that I just went crazy over. It was a box that composed music. It was a computer thing that generated random music that made sense. And I went crazy over it. I said, Andrew, where can I get this? You know, and he said, well, there's only one, unfortunately. And I said, well, where did you get it? And he said, well, my father made it. But it looked like a completely finished product that you would buy at Best Buy or something like that. And I also remember when I went into their kitchen after school one day, or I used to enter through the kitchen, and Claude would just be sitting there, usually, you know, just very informally watching a white mouse and sipping Coke and watching the Boston Bruins replays on Channel 38. And I got kind of concerned because all the other families I knew had, the fathers were employed. So I asked Andrew one day, I said, Andrew, is your father okay? Does he have a job? And Andrew said, well, he used to go to MIT, but now he stays home. And there are a few graduate students who come here now, but that was the answer. That's
Anyway, amazing.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Did you?
Oh, I love the movie. Yes.
What's your name? Or do you still contact Andrew, or I should tell him that?
I would like to contact him. I've been out of touch with him. I intend to very shortly. So I'd like to get in touch with him. My name is Scott Knopf.
Scott Knopf?
Yeah, like the publisher. And he's a very good friend of mine. I just have been out of touch for a while. I've moved to Florida within the last 5 years and kind of been too busy to keep up.
That's great to hear. You have stories I didn't know about. I saw a movie. Andrew sent me a movie that he made. I wonder, is this the thing where Claude is it's like a spy thing and he's running along the car? Oh,
no,
okay.
No.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, my friend Lisa wants me to mention this may have to do with the fact that his father was a part-time undertaker, Claude's father, but he was really quite intrigued by skeletons. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact,
Is that
one of the few things we didn't include because we couldn't fit it is in that room is, did you see the thing? He had the skeleton musicians that rotated.
That was really cool.
Yeah. So he had almost like full-size skeleton musicians that played instruments, and this thing rotated.
Well, I don't think I think he finished that after I last saw the room.
Yeah, Andrew has it, but it was so big we couldn't film.
Oh, that's a different one, because the one I saw must have been the prototype. It was like a box that was about 18 inches by 2 feet.
Right.
And he had a Dixieland band in there of miniature skeletons. I don't know how he made it.
Yeah.
And they were playing Dixieland jazz, and, very beautifully. Yeah.
He liked one of the other features was Shannon liked to build iterations of things in different scales. So if you see, I mean, there's like everything he does in multiple scales. And so he also built, supposedly it may have been like the first mobile home, where he basically bought an old bus and he sheared it off and he made it into a home. which they then drove across to California.
Yeah.
But he built models of every scale of that thing, and I saw
Oh, that's
them.
interesting.
And,
Yeah.
and he had the tiny one, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, and each one would be inside. They'd be like true life with all those little rooms and things like that as well.
Wow.
Yeah. He was
So,
extremely fun.
yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
That's
thank you.
amazing.
Yeah, I love the movie. Thank you. And
Thank
it
you.
seemed-
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, we got time for a couple more questions. So we got one over here, and then we'll keep on searching. And some down here as well if you need some more. All right, go ahead over there.
I don't really want to follow that guy, but
Yeah, sorry about that.
I got nothing. Do you consider human emotion entropy?
Anyone down there have a quick answer for that one?
I mean, entropy is a really interesting and complicated quantity. I mean, the apocryphal story is that when Shannon was trying to figure out what to call it, that who was it, von Neumann? Somebody, maybe it was von Neumann, said that nobody understands entropy, so why don't you just call it entropy and nobody will question it that way. And I think there's still, there's still big questions about what is the relationship between thermodynamic entropy, because entropy was known from thermodynamics, and Shannon entropy. And it's clear that there is some relation, and statistically, I mean, thermodynamics entropy does relate to randomness and disorder. And in information theory, there's a correlation in the sense that a greater entropy would require more information. But it's a probabilistic thing, and so I'm not sure how it would apply to
So just to
something
expand on your point, there's the work of John Wheeler had a theory which he called it from bit, trying to relate the information theory aspects and physical sciences like thermodynamics, and that's an interesting potential keyword if you want to look up more along that lines. He didn't talk about emotion. I'm not sure how to relate it to emotion.
I mean, actually, I think in one thing, it's interesting when you bring up emotion, because I think to understand exactly what Shannon did, I mean, the magnitude of what he did is, in terms of, people didn't understand what information was, really, at that time. It was in a sense, it was like consciousness or emotion. Now, which is the question, how do you calculate that? How do you make it into a measurable quantity? That's the big problem. And I think, in some sense, the greatest aspect of Shannon's genius is that he realized that the way to approach this, how could you do something like this and arithmetize it in a sense, was to change it into probabilities. And that was the great thing that he could do. And the universality of it relates to a couple of your questions in terms of the magnitude of what he did. It relates to a couple of the questions here. What I've heard, I mean, Bob Gallagher said this, is that I think that the feeling is that the relationship between Boolean algebra and circuits, somebody else would have gotten, in not too short order. That it was burbling, and as Elaine said, there was a lot of people that were working on probabilistic ideas. But what Shannon's genius was to universalize it. I think that's the thing that nobody did. And when you look at what real genius is, it's the realization that all these things could be related, and that then you could have a universal theory, and it could be simplified to this single thing. And to me, I think that is, when you talk about huge jumps in genius of some of these people, it's the fact that they related things that a lot of people were working on. Einstein, same thing with special relativity. Even the equations were there for the most part. But it was the understanding of how it all comes together. And what Bob Gallagher himself said is that even for him, it took him a number of years to realize that it's the fact that everything is bits, that everything can be reduced to it, was really the significant thing.
Fantastic. All right, two more down here, yeah? There's two down here, absolutely, right here. One moment. I can also just repeat your question, go for it.
Yeah, oh, it's okay, thanks.
I lied.
So hi, everybody. I just wanted to say, first of all, I really found the movie fascinating, and the discussion is also super interesting, so thank you for all of your contributions. Azadeh, I found what you were talking about in your work and your research really, really interesting, but this is a question for everyone. They mentioned just briefly near the end of the movie about kind of some of the neuroscientific applications of information theory. I found it really interesting that, and tragic, and ironic that unfortunately Claude Shannon suffered from Alzheimer's, degenerative neural disease, obviously. And I'm wondering if information theory is being used to improve connectivity, to reduce redundancy, to somehow be used in that kind of framework.
Mark, I hope you can help me with that question. I don't know the answer.
Well, I think
I'm not aware of it.
I mean, what just from talking to Henry Markram in particular, who is a little bit of a controversial figure in the field, I think that it is being used in the sense of simplification. I mean, it's interesting. I have not heard about it, and that's a very interesting point you raise. Is in terms of being remedial or something like that. That is interesting. I mean, I mean, I've sort of followed a little some of the developments in what's happening with Alzheimer's, and I think there's debate even. Is it a question of things that are being lost? There's even ideas now that it may be an asynchronicity in signals. That, I mean, the latest thing I had read is that that they've discovered that there's certain general harmonic waves in the brain, and that it may be that they're out of phase, and that's what may be causing some of the memory loss. But it certainly seems like it could be something that would be appropriate. I mean, if there can be a simplification or something like that, I think that's a very interesting avenue for research.
Absolutely. All right, got one more right over here. Go for it.
Hi. First of all, I was in a little public high school on Amelia Island in 1960 in 7th grade, and all of a sudden, the science teacher put up on the board 1 + 1 = 1. And he proceeded to teach us what he called binary math, not Boolean algebra. And of course, it wasn't in the textbook. And he told us that this was very, very important information, and that we would all have to know this and how to calculate, and that he related it to computers. And anyway, it was an amazing thing that never showed up in my education ever again. And I've talked to a lot of people who went to much more sophisticated urban high schools, and nobody ever had that class. And I've thought about that a lot. But anyway, that's just an anecdote. But my question and my comment to Mark is, thank you so much for this film, really. And you did a brilliant job of communicating a film all about communication. I just thought it was tremendous. And how on earth do we get people who weren't fortunate enough to be here today to be able to see it? Is it streaming anywhere? How can I pass this along?
Well, thank you, and that's a very good question, and I'm glad you reminded me. Yes, so the film we're just getting it out. We're just doing it in specialized screenings. Luckily, it's part of the Science on Screen series. It's available for sponsored screenings at institutions, at conferences. We do have an international distributor, and it will be eventually on streaming, but that's a process, so I'm not sure when exactly yet. But the best thing to do is to go to our website. Thebitplayer.com. It has a place people can sign up. And we post news of where there's screenings. We will post news when it's available. So we also have a Twitter feed on the Bit Player. So I mean, the great thing would be to publicize the movie, so people that are active on Twitter or Facebook, and going on our website And just if we can show that there's more demand, then it will be great. So I know they showed it to Netflix, the people at Netflix, and my film Particle Fever was on Netflix, so there was a good success. But their comment was now, especially with Netflix, now people just need to see a picture, and nobody's going to know who Claude Shannon is, so they're not going to click on it. Which is, of course, you want to say, well, that's the whole point, actually. As much as we can demonstrate that there is a big audience, and I think there is. I mean, people have been very responsive, and we've really, literally shown it all over the world now. And, there's more and more demand for it. So, as I say, I'm just trying to publicize it on social media and build some awareness. And follow it on either on Twitter or on the website for where it's going to be. I do try to post things, and IEEE is being very helpful too. They post when there's going to be a screening. So if you know anybody in Michigan, there's going to be a screening at the Michigan Theater on Tuesday, and there's other things that are coming up in that regard as well.
All right, well, fantastic. That is all the time we have for us today, but thank you guys so much. We could not have done it with all these panelists, so please give it up for everyone. Dr. Elaine Raybourn, Dr. Azadeh Vosoughi, Nick Teague, and Mark Levinson, of course. Thank you for the Enzian Theater and for the Orlando Science Center, although I'm a little biased for bringing us out here today. Thank you all so much for coming, and definitely have a great day. Go spread the word of Claude Shannon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.